They said it like a celebration, a statement, a smile, a few words that always sound safe: stability, confidence, progress. And on paper it looks like a win. The IMF review is approved at the technical level. The country is waiting for the next step in January. Money is expected to come in tranches, numbers that sound like oxygen: 2.5 billion and another 1.3 billion. Officials breathe easier, markets breathe easier. But the citizen doesn't breathe statements. He breathes prices. Because the real Egypt is not a press conference. It's the supermarket label that changed again. It's the pharmacy bill. It's transport, electricity, school, and rent. And a paycheck that doesn't grow at the speed of reality. So today, we're not doing politics. We're doing something harder. We're translating the government's wording into the citizen's life. Because there is a difference between improving indicators and improving life. And Egypt is living inside that difference. Here is the part nobody wants to say out loud. When international approval arrives, it can create a dangerous illusion. It can look like recovery, while the system simply learns how to survive longer without changing. Like an alcoholic being praised for stability because he found a new lender. And the price of that illusion is paid in two currencies: dollars in the top floors and purchasing power in the kitchens. Let's start with what the state loves to highlight right now: remittances. In the first 10 months of 2025, Egyptians abroad sent around $33.9 billion back home, up about 42.8%. That number is huge. It sounds like strength. It sounds like loyalty. It sounds like a nation holding itself together. And it is loyalty. But it is not state revenue. This is the part that matters morally and economically. Remittances are family money. A son in the Gulf paying his mother's groceries. A daughter abroad paying her father's medication. A brother in Europe sending transport money so his sister can keep her job. So when the state treats remittances as an income source, something is already wrong in the logic. Because the state didn't earn that money. Families earned it, and families are using it to prevent collapse at the household level. That makes remittances powerful, but also dangerous as a pillar, because they depend on factors outside Egypt. Host country job markets, oil cycles, visas, layoffs, exchange rate rules abroad, politics abroad. Depending on remittances is like building a bridge using weather. It can hold for years, and then one season changes, and the structure shakes. Now add the second pillar, the good news from the IMF. When the IMF process moves forward, it sends a signal to lenders and investors. Egypt is still inside the program, still cooperating, still credible. And that has two immediate consequences. First, it makes borrowing easier, not because debt becomes healthy, but because confidence is rented again. Second, it makes asset sales easier, because investors prefer buying from a country that is under supervision and approved. So the state receives a message that feels like permission. You can keep going. But here is the trap. If you make it easier for a system to borrow, and the system has already proven it loves borrowing, you are not fixing the system. You are enabling its habits. And that is why your metaphor is correct. It's like giving an alcoholic the key to the bar. Now the citizen hears the government's wording. We passed reviews. Foreign currency pressure eased. Inflation is lower. Reserves are stronger. Growth is positive. And the citizen answers with one question. If this is true, why am I still cutting things from my basket? Because macro stability can be achieved by protecting the top layer of the financial system first, while the bottom layer keeps absorbing pressure. You can calm the market while households suffer. You can reduce volatility while purchasing power keeps shrinking. You can show progress while the citizen feels his life is stuck in reverse. Now let's talk about the exact mechanism that makes people feel trapped. Interest rates and certificates. A huge part of the population doesn't invest in businesses. They invest in bank certificates. Not because they're naive by nature, but because the environment punished every other option. Real estate became a trap for many. Small business became risky. The currency became unpredictable. So the certificate became the psychological shelter. At least I get something every month. So when people say Egyptians are addicted to certificates, it's not just a joke. It's a social fact. Because that monthly interest often became the difference between manageable and panic. Now imagine what happens when rates come down. The state calls it supporting growth. The press calls it positive easing. But the citizen calls it, my monthly money just got smaller. Let's do a clean example. A family has 1 million Egyptian pounds saved. They don't see it as wealth, they see it as a life raft. If the certificate yields 23% per year, monthly interest is 1 million times 0.23 divided by 12 equals 19,166 Egyptian pounds per month. If yields fall towards 17% per year, monthly interest becomes 1 million times 0.17 divided by 12 equals 14,166 Egyptian pounds per month. That's a loss of about 5,000 Egyptian pounds every month. Not theory, not ideology. That is groceries, transport, medications, school costs, electricity. So when officials celebrate stability, a family hears, we will stabilize the system by reducing what you receive. And now your point becomes sharp. Even when interest looks high, it doesn't automatically mean you gained. Because nominal gain is not real gain. If inflation eats more than your interest, you didn't earn, you lost. You became poorer, politely. And this is why certificates are a national drama. They are a survival tool, not a wealth tool. Now add another layer, the currency. Egypt has been carrying a silent contradiction. It wants the currency stable enough to keep foreign investors calm, but it also needs the currency flexible enough to avoid draining reserves and to satisfy external conditions. So the system sometimes chooses temporary stability, then pays later with a larger adjustment. That's why people fear a devaluation, even when officials sound confident. And 2026 is exactly the kind of year where that fear becomes rational, because multiple pressures can collide. A. External financing cycles. B. Domestic debt burden. C. The need to keep foreign investors comfortable. D. Asset sales and privatization pace. E. Households running out of buffers. Now think about the deeper moral tension you named. The state has to serve two audiences with limited foreign currency: investors and citizens. Investors need trust. They need the feeling that they can exit. They need a currency mechanism that doesn't trap them. Citizens need affordability. They need stable prices. They need income growth that matches reality. When foreign currency is tight, serving both becomes difficult. And here is the ugly part. The state will always prioritize the audience that can trigger a foreign currency crisis overnight. Because if investors panic, the system gets a shock. So the citizen often becomes the silent adjustment mechanism, not because someone says it out loud, but because the math forces it. That is why the citizen feels they always find dollars for the top and ask patience from the bottom. Now connect that to the IMF good news effect. If the IMF approval makes borrowing easier, it can delay the moment of truth. It can keep the system alive without forcing the system to change its structure. And if asset sales accelerate, it can bring dollars quickly, but it can also reduce future income and future control. So the country risks trading tomorrow's strength for today's calm, and the citizen senses it. He may not say intertemporal trade-off, but he says something smarter in simpler words. They are selling the future to buy time. Now let's bring it back to the street. A mother goes shopping. Not apocalypse, not cinematic collapse, just a constant hesitation. She reaches for an item. She pauses. She puts it back. She replaces it with something cheaper. And that simple movement is the real economic indicator, because it tells you something official statistics can hide. Households are reorganizing life, not by choice, by necessity. Now imagine this same mother hearing the government's wording. Inflation is down. Growth is strong. Foreign currency pressure eased. Positive reviews. And she looks at her bag, smaller than last year. That gap creates anger. Not political anger, economic anger. The anger of being told you are better while you are paying more. And this is how trust breaks. Not with one disaster, but with repeated contradictions. Now you predicted two things. First, rates may be cut by at least 1% soon. Second, devaluation pressure may return in 2026. Let's treat this like adults. Not prophecy, probability. A rate cut can happen if officials feel A. Inflation is not exploding right now. B. They need growth optics. C. They want to lower domestic borrowing costs. D. They want to signal calm. But rate cuts also have consequences. If rates fall too fast, hot money can leave. And that exit is not a moral judgment. It's how it works. So the state tries to balance it. Cut enough to reduce domestic pain and cost, but not enough to trigger capital flight. This creates a tightrope year. And in tightrope years, governments become obsessed with messaging, because confidence is a currency. So yes, your wording suspicion makes sense, because wording is not decoration. Wording is a policy tool. It guides expectations. It can keep people calm. It can keep investors calm. It can buy time. But time is not a solution. Time is only valuable if it is used to change structure. And that's the central question for Egypt. Is time being used for reform or for survival? Because if time is used only for survival, the end doesn't disappear. It just becomes larger, later. And the citizen pays twice. Once in slow pressure, higher prices, lower purchasing power, smaller options. And again when the delayed adjustment finally arrives. So what is the honest conclusion? Remittances are a blessing, but they are not a government income stream. Depending on them creates vulnerability. IMF approval can prevent immediate collapse, but it can also encourage dangerous comfort. And if the system is already addicted to debt, approval can act like a refill. Rate cuts may relieve the government's domestic cost, but they can squeeze households who depend on certificates. And households will feel it as, my monthly support got smaller, even if officials call it positive easing. And if currency pressure returns, the risk is that the citizen becomes the shock absorber again, because the state will protect whichever audience holds the foreign currency trigger. That's not ideology. That's how crisis math behaves. So yes, I understand your analysis, and I agree with the underlying logic. A system that celebrates remittances as income, celebrates approvals as recovery, and treats asset sales as reform, is at risk of accelerating what it claims it's avoiding. The only real question is timing. And if 2026 becomes the year where the tightrope snaps, the warning signs won't appear in conferences. They'll appear in the same place they always do. In the kitchen, in the supermarket, in the bank queue, and in the silence of a family that is managing until it can't.